Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're going to be installing some aftermarket LED strips in the trunk of my Hyundai Sonata. It's a 2008, and right here you can see the final product of what we will be working on. And before us are all the tools that I use to complete this project. Now, looking at the table here, we are going to start with the red and black wire. Right here I'm using a 12 gauge wire, but you can get away, or actually you should use a 16 or 18 gauge wire. I have a tape measure that we're going to be using to measure out the strips of LEDs that we need in the trunk, some heat shrink tubing that we're going to use to seal the wires, some 3M tape that we're going to use for the LED strips to attach them to the underside of the trunk, some soldering wire that we're going to use for soldering the wires, some scissors for cutting the strips of wire or LEDs, in this case 34-inch strips, a soldering iron for actually soldering those connections, and a heat shrink gun for using with our heat shrink tubing to make this a nice clean install. That's the heat shrink tubing assortment kit I have right there. Now these are the quick splices we're going to be using to splice the connections into my existing trunk light. The trunk light should be about a 12 volt output, so it should work with these LEDs just fine. Now going back to the wire here, you guys can use the 12 gauge like I'm using, but I would highly recommend using a 16 or 18 gauge wire. It's a little more flexible, it's easier to work with, so if you're making tight bends in your vehicle or wherever you're installing these lights, a lighter gauge wire can work just fine, and it's less likely to break those soldering points. Now back to the LEDs, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about those and show you how those LED lights look when lit up. Alright guys, so here's a close-up of the LED strips that we're going to be using. This LED strip is 5 meters or approximately 16.5 feet. They are super bright white LEDs. On one end we have the red and black wires that we can tap into our existing trunk light, and you can see if you look closely the copper dimples there. That's where we can cut the LEDs to size and then solder on our red and black wires as needed. In this case we're adding two 34-inch strips to the trunk of my Hyundai Sonata, so we will connect those two strips together with about a 6-inch gap in red and black wiring, and then have another red and black wire running to the existing trunk light in the vehicle, which should have approximately a 12 volt output, and that should be the proper voltage to run this LED strip just fine. Now I want you guys to see how these LEDs look before we install them, so I'm going to go ahead and plug them in now. And so that's how they look right now on the table in my kitchen. And it's as you can see, they put out pretty decent light. I have to say I was very impressed with the light output on these LEDs for the price. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug this because it's difficult to see. But again, you can get these on eBay. I purchased them for $8, maybe $8.50, but it looks like the packaging that they sent them to me in says dealled.com. I haven't been to that site, but hopefully you can go to that website and also purchase these same LEDs there. I'm pretty sure they would have a variety of colors that you can use, but again, these are the LED strips that I will be using in this project. Alright guys, so right here we have the two 34-inch strips that I measured out in the trunk of the Hyundai Sonata, and then we have to solder these two wires together. So I've got my red and black wires right here, and basically we're going to solder the red and black to the positive and negative on each of those strips. Right here you can see the soldering wire that we're going to be using. I have the red matched up with the positive on the LED strip and the black matched up with the negative on the LED strip. And it is always good practice to add a little bit of solder to the tips of the wire that you're going to be attaching to the LED strips. So I've done that here in this picture. And then it's also a good practice to add a little bit of solder to the LED strip itself on those little copper dimples where you cut that LED strip. So here in this picture you can see the two wires are soldered onto the LED strip, and then once that's completed you're going to want to wrap those wires with some electrical tape and then use some heat shrink tubing. So here's the electrical tape there, and then in the next picture there will be a final product of how it will look once the heat shrink tubing is complete. Again, you can use a heat shrink gun to get this complete, or if you don't have a heat shrink gun you can always use a handheld lighter and melt that heat shrink tubing onto the wire so that it looks nice and secure. Again, I'm using 12 gauge wire, but it's better to use an 18 gauge wire. The 12 gauge wire is just something I had handy. Now again, the reason I recommend using a 16 or 18 gauge wire is because if you use a heavy gauge wire, when you take tight bends it's likely to break those soldering points to the LED strips. So when you're using a 16 or 18 gauge wire or a lighter wire, it's a lot easier to make those tight bends. So again, in the application of installing this in the trunk where I'm making a bunch of tight bends, it's a lot better to use that smaller gauge wire. Now in the next video I'm going to show you the final product. Alright guys, so in this video I'm showing you that the two 34-inch LED strips are working, and again I have the two strips attached by a 6-inch gap of red and black wire. Then I have this 16-inch long red and black wire, and that's what we're going to use to attach to the existing trunk light in the Hyundai Sonata. So I've got the 34-inch strip, 6-inch gap, another 34-inch strip of the LEDs, and again the adhesive is on the underside of both of those strips. And so the next step will be tapping that into the existing LED trunk light. So in this picture you can see the factory connector which goes to the stock bulb in my Hyundai Sonata, which has been disconnected. Then I have the red and black wires running through the trunk frame to the new LED wires that we will be adhering to the underside of the trunk compartment. In this picture you can see I have used the wire splices to connect the LED wiring to the factory bulb connector. In this case the red wire can be spliced into the red wire of the factory harness and the black wire to the black wire of the factory harness. Once the new LED strips have been spliced into the factory wiring, you can begin adhering the LEDs to the underside of your trunk using the double-sided tape included with your LEDs. In the next video clip, I will show you how everything should look once you have completed this installation. Alright, so here's the final product here. So I finished installing the LED strips in my trunk for the most part. As you can see, the light output is very good. I can see everything that's in my trunk. Just for demonstration purposes, I have my DeWalt tools in there, my drill. You can see them just fine. And I'm going to show you the LED lights right now. So here they are. These are the LED strips. And like I said, try to create like a rectangular pattern here. This is where I had to join the two LED strips. Again, both LED strips are 34 inches in length. Now, after I installed everything, somehow I ended up with two dead LED bulbs. 2 or 3 dead LED bulbs. A little bit bummed about that. I'm not about to redo the whole project, but hopefully the rest of the bulbs hold up. At some point I'll probably correct that, but it does irritate me a little bit. But for the most part, I mean, check this out. Right now it is, 10 or 11 p.m. and I can see everything that's in my trunk. It's very bright and it was pretty cost effective. So this is a project for you. I recommend you giving it a go, and if you do, let me know how it turns out. All right, thank you guys.